The Backroads Part 1, June 16, 2022, a Thursday, and I have no idea where I am. I'm not even sure if this is still Louisiana, as I'm stopped on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. I've been traveling for 9 hours without a bar of service, and now all I want to do is sleep, but I'm scared to shut my eyes. It's becoming worse from staring at this screen, yet I need the diversion. This doesn't make sense. If you take the highway, my house is 30 minutes from the town. However, if you choose a different route, you can ride the back roads for hours. The majority of them aren't even marked on maps. Mom used to take me riding on summer evenings when I was younger, and we would always find new paths to go. I also learned to drive that way, and I began going more frequently once I had my license. Though I used to enjoy going alone, I used to occasionally bring friends along. This was especially fun when Mom passed away 6 years ago from an intoxicated driver. It's ideal for camping. I've never seen a house or more than a few other cars here. I spent more nights there than I can remember, and each time I felt completely safe, almost like I was the only person in the world. This voyage was the same as the last, save for that awful tunnel. Facing just one job on the books doesn't help with the difficult times I've been facing lately. Since there was nothing on the wedding menu that could be prepared the day before, I talked myself into taking a trip, which was obviously a bad idea. There's a gorgeous, glistening pond that quickly became my favorite spot for short excursions or days when I went with someone. It's not that far, and I believe I know every road there. There should have been just 2 options after leaving the pond: returning home or traveling farther into nowhere, but I noticed a third one. As I turned the truck around, I noticed that the tree line obscured a paved road from view. I've driven past that pond 1,000 times and always turn around at the same spot, so it's understandable to miss it when going by, but I was too delighted to give it any more thought. Upon closer inspection, all that stood in my way were weeds and shrubs, so I chose to drive right through. It felt really foolish to say now, of course, but a fresh road this close to home was too good to pass up. The thicket was easy for me to get through, and after a mile it cleared out once more. However, 6 miles later, I realized it was time to turn around. I could finally see the end of the road at that point. What appeared to be an old train track bridge was ahead, and beneath what I initially believed to be a dead end was actually a tunnel. It appeared too small to drive through at first. The road did go on. I could see dawn at the other end. All I wanted to do was get my headlights close enough to peek inside. The tunnel itself was absolutely vacant, yet it smelt musty and was moist. The road stretches for kilometers ahead with sporadic turnoffs on either side as I emerge from the other side. Following the straight path should have made it difficult for me to get lost. I should have been able to turn around and return to the pond at any time. I'm still baffled as to why that isn't true. After an hour of nothing but random cutoffs, I noticed it was becoming late and eventually turned around. My objective had been to locate a landmark to use on the next visit. As far as I could tell, everything appeared to be exactly the same. I'm not sure where I went wrong, but an hour and a half later, I was still cruising and there was no evidence of the tunnel. It defies logic. If anything, I was driving even faster than before. I drove for 30 more minutes and then came to a total stop. I needed to urinate and have some quiet time to myself without worrying about if I was getting farther from home. I could have gotten lost if I had made even one turn, but going back after traveling straight ahead felt strange. That would entail hours of walking backwards and then turning around once again if that didn't work. For how many hours would the same ground be covered with no benefit? However, because there is plainly a problem, there is no other option. It aggravates me. I couldn't have just stayed by the side of the road, but I'm still caught in that terrible thinking loop. Eventually, I turned around again, moving much more slowly this time. I could only imagine being lost if there had been a divide in the road when I wasn't looking. There was not even a remote possibility that I would merge off any of the turnoffs, so I stopped at every one and even exited a couple of times. It was getting dusk when I returned to my first halting spot, and my brain gave me the information I needed to keep from going back a third time. As I was now riding in a straight route, and it had to lead someplace. I reasoned that Mom and I had only been able to spend so much time on the back roads because we had taken the tiny, winding trails that never actually led anywhere. It was almost midnight when I stopped because the road abruptly ended, or at least the pavement did. All I had to do was go to the next town, or maybe not that far if I could locate a site with mobile service. There is only a long, dusty route remaining, and it is unlikely that I will locate a signal that way. I will have to wait until daylight to investigate a few of the cutoffs. Nothing concerning this Friday. I wonder whether I've been reported missing. How could I not be? I'm positive I have. They'll undoubtedly look in the back roads first. Isn't that right? Of course it is. Last night, I felt like I was going to die. Sweet fire shits. As I was writing while stretched out across the back seat, I noticed sounds coming from the jungle. Before it broke through the tree line, and I dropped the phone because I thought it was an animal, I heard the distinct sound of shoes scraping against pavement. My body went numb with fear, but only for a brief moment did I feel blissful relief as I pictured myself being saved by an elderly, loving farmer. Volunteers for search parties did not spend the nighttime hours by themselves in the woods without flashlights. I would have heard an engine if this individual had driven there as well. It seemed fair to assume that someone skulking through a dark woodland would be armed, so I immediately thought of jumping in the driver's seat and running for it. But then I envisioned bullets bursting through the glass. I had no idea what the heck to do. More than anything, I wanted my pistol out of the glove box, but my arms would not cooperate. My body eventually moved as the footsteps, which seemed to be coming from someone inspecting my truck, turned to go down the passenger side. It was too dark to see much without the light from the phone, but as I crept forward, I heard footsteps halt near the front passenger door, and my heart stopped too. I was hesitating, my hand resting on the handle of the glove box, wondering if the light would turn on, when I came to a startling realization. I went to the bathroom, but I hadn't secured the doors. Rather than groping for the controls, I reached for the knob and pressed it down gently. The calm of the night was broken like a gunshot by the dull thud of a locked handle being pulled, and I stopped being cautious in my actions. The sound of numerous footfall ran back into the trees as I tore open the glove box, grabbed my gun, and racked one into the chamber. Nothing had indicated that more than one person was outside, but now it was obvious. I pushed myself into the driver's seat as others tore through the dense undergrowth, and feet were skidding on the tarmac. Just in time to see the final two people disappear into the shadows, the headlights turned on. My stomach knotted at the image of that long, dirt road, and I was crying with happiness that I had turned around before parking instead of doing so out of caution. Regarding the bunch of crazy people, I'm not sure. Maybe it's time to consider the idea that I'm the insane one. Those people looked like animalistic terminal cancer patients, from what I could see as I raced away. They moved with a deceptive quickness despite being terribly thin and bent over like gorillas. I was fully awake and moving more quickly than I should have been because of the excitement, but I wanted to get as far away from those folks as possible. After a few kilometers of driving, my mind gradually started producing clear ideas once more. My new acquaintances don't have access to motorized transportation. I believe it's safe to say. Yet I drove for nearly an hour before pulling over. I was going to pass out while driving if I didn't close my eyes, and if I crashed, I would be dead. I set an alarm for 3 hours before dawn, fell asleep, and somehow woke up when it went off. The lengthy trip ahead of me acted as a depressing reminder of my circumstances when I awoke to a misty morning. Fortunately, there were some necessities in the truck, even though Mother Nature had called, and I was starving. I'm glad I refrained from drinking the whiskey bottle after downing 2 power bars. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any right now. The things I've witnessed today are enough to make that gun appear extremely tempting. I continued traveling straight down the same road the entire goddamn day, which is the route I should have been taking all along. I wasn't going to start ignoring a number of strange roads that could lead me in circles, even if it took 12 hours to discover the next town. By 9 o'clock, all I could see were trees and patches of grass. I could hardly control my rage as my stomach was growling louder than my music when a familiar beeping threw me over the brink. When I had managed to gather some composure, my face was as red as it felt, and I had a raw throat. The gaslight was on, and the prospect of dying out here quickly became very real. I thought I was seeing things when I rounded the following curve. A tiny gas station appeared out of nowhere, but I could not have traveled any farther than I had yesterday, and I most certainly could not have passed it by without noticing. My heart fell when I learned it was abandoned as I got closer. There were only ancient pumps and a dark store. There were no other cars, lights, or signs. Even so, I parked to give it some thought, and kept being shocked. The pumps appeared as though they had just been installed last week, despite the structure appearing to have been abandoned for 20 years. The person next to me turned on, including the TV, as soon as I came out to stretch my legs. Though that shouldn't have been feasible, it doesn't really matter where we are. That being said, I was not going to let the chance pass me by. The woman on TV was much more amazing than the fact that it worked. Like at a typical gas station, she was providing the local news and weather updates. Enjoy the gorgeous, bright day out on the paved back roads. The remnants of the fog from this morning will soon dissipate, and this afternoon's high temperature will be 98. Due caution should be used by those switching to dirt roads, since there has been a noticeable increase in reports of stranded vehicles. We appreciate you selecting last stop station. Until we see you again, have safe travels. There were many things she said that I can't recall, and I didn't understand half of what she said. My phone is going to be ready to record if I find another one. Thankfully, I have a car charger, or I wouldn't even have that by now. I decided to look in the store after refueling because I was almost out of food and down to my last bottle of water. Anything that wasn't toxic would have been taken, so I was surprised to see things like soups, water, and canned fruit that were there waiting to be taken. Although those were well stocked, there were no soft beverages, miscellaneous accessories, or snack items. The items looked like they had been sitting there for years if the canned sell-by dates hadn't been so close together. There was no cash register, no phone, and no place to prepare the soup. Even though the store seemed unusual, I didn't want to leave because it was good to finally stretch my legs and be outside of the truck for more than just a quick restroom break. Everything about it was just off. I was sadly unable to pay to squander time loitering around an abandoned petrol station. I gave in and stayed long enough to get something to eat in the end. I washed the road more often than I'd like to confess, but I tried not to get my hopes up that someone else would stop by. Finding a temporary pot and starting a fire was my initial plan, but then I realized some of my camping supplies were still in the truck. The only difficult element of using my hot plate was prying open the cans with a dull pocket knife. No one showed up as anticipated, but I had to go before I wasted any more time. I persuaded myself to take some supplies at that point because I thought I would be spending the rest of the day driving. Before I knew it, I had robbed the establishment blind, and I hoped the cops would come seeking. I can dream, but they won't. With a full stomach and a truck full of free supplies, I felt better, but it's difficult to remain composed when you're approaching your second night of being stuck in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, I drove straight into the sunset until the pavement ended, and I had to brake hard once more. The path ahead was another dusty, lengthy path that filled one with the same icy dread as the previous one. Although common sense told me that the strange, pale folks couldn't possibly exist, I decided not to take any chances. After an hour of driving, I made a U-turn and pulled over for the night. I started writing after finishing a can of peaches, and ever since, the woman on that tiny TV hasn't left my thoughts. I'm interested in hearing about the bit about getting stuck again. Perhaps I'm not the only one who has experienced this. She was speaking about these roads as like they were their own village or something. In any case, I need more than a few hours of sleep. I've had enough for one day. I have to pick one of the cutoffs tomorrow, because I can no longer continue on this route. Without a doubt, I'm no longer in Louisiana or even the real planet. This afternoon, I had a meeting. I'm not sure if he's a demon or a delusion, but I don't think he's genuine. When I couldn't locate the petrol station again, I basically made a snap decision, and 20 miles later, I saw a man strolling down the shoulder. He started pleading on his hands and knees in the middle of the road, and I was nearly too scared to stop. Ultimately, I was more in need of a talking partner than I was of being killed. He says he knows a little something about what's going on here, and even if his explanation is utterly implausible, I am at a loss for ideas. He is clueless as to how or why things are the way they are, but he drove through a tunnel to get here, just like I did, although in Pennsylvania. I wouldn't have believed him if he hadn't given me his story first, since it sounds too similar to mine. What transpired after he ran out of petrol is the only thing that differs. Before starting a quarter tank, he was unaware that anything was amiss. The next curve revealed a service station, just as it did for me, and from his description, it seems to be the same one. The TV at the pump turned on, and following a quick weather update, there was yet another unclear PSA. Additionally, remember to restock for tomorrow. No exceptions will be made to the usual Sunday closure of our stations. Thank you for selecting Last Stop Station, and please make sure that everyone leaves the property by 11:59 p.m. at the latest. Until then, have safe travels. He went inside to find the store almost empty after filling up, and only then discovered there were no other cars or people in the area. He concerned that the clerk might have been harmed because the pump indicated that the business must be open. When Rob walked outside to look for a signal and couldn't find one, he realized the business was located at the base of a steep hill. Though he could have easily made his way up without a trail, he was still unable to receive reception. He headed down the slope, determined to drive back to town, only to discover that his car and the business had vanished. He claims he found the road easily and walked in a straight path, but it was deserted. I wouldn't have believed it if it weren't for my personal experiences over the past few days, but I do now. If Rob is real, of course, all he could do was go off on foot, walking in the direction he thought would lead him to the town. It was getting close to dusk, and he still hadn't spotted another car or store after several hours. It was then that he encountered Bonnie and Clyde, or so they called themselves. Rob hurried inside to share his story when they were stopped at their own gas station, but the couple wasn't interested in hearing it. While Bonnie was loading their van, Clyde had Rob at gunpoint. The pair refused to give him a ride, but in exchange, the man agreed to answer a few questions. This guy told Rob that the backroads are divided into 3 stages, each of which is more hazardous than the previous. Stage 1 is made up of the paved streets, which comprise the periphery. Stage 2 consists of the dirt roads that take you deeper into the maze. Stage 3 consists of the tire tracks in the grass that lead to the center of the maze. If you go far enough into nothing, you can find the entrance practically any place in the universe, but the exit is exclusive to Stage 3. Gas stations only show up when your car is running low on fuel, and they vanish as soon as you drive away. Rob would still be driving if he had ascended the hill before filling up his tank. I'm glad I brought the camping equipment, since I would have heated my soup the wrong way. This regulation does not apply on Sundays. If you run out of fuel during that time, you will have to wait for the store to reopen. Everything within that was there when it vanished will remain there, except people. Clyde mentioned that there used to be 4 members of their gang, but we don't know what happens to them. When it vanished, the other 2 made the decision to investigate, but all that was left was their clothing and bags. Just the prospect of booze and junk food becoming available in the stores in Stage 2 intrigues me. I don't think I could manage this place sober after finishing my whiskey last night. It wouldn't be past midnight if I wasn't already on my way. The paved streets are rather safe up until they turn into dirt, which is where the stranded like to hide, and where Rob was headed before I spotted him. This is in contrast to the previous 2 stages. Those who lose their cars are unable to summon gas stations and eventually seek refuge in the forest, hiding there during the day and emerging only at night. The fortunate can create new groups or join ones that already exist. They don't require too many members to feed them, just enough to attack tourists. Rejected people get eaten, and those that make an effort to live alone end up starving. They eventually start to resemble the ones I saw, and if I had been asleep and left my doors open, I would have ended up as their supper. Regarding stage 2, Rob's knowledge is limited to the fact that something stalks the roadways at night. When he questioned Clyde about the last stage, the man turned pale and refused to discuss the matter further. The pair expressed regret for their harsh actions and said they were just unable to take the chance of dating a stranger as they got back in their car. Rob takes offense at it, but I don't see why. I never would have quit if I wasn't desperate and alone. It appears that in stage 3, individuals attempt to locate a way out, and those who make it through decide to live on the paved streets. All evening I have been thinking about it, and I would sooner die than spend the rest of my days in this place. Rob was pretty irritated that I didn't want to spend 6 days a week inside a petrol station. Before I even tried to appear to agree with him, we had a 3-hour argument. I was tired of it, but more importantly, I was beginning to worry that Rob might beat me over the head and take the truck if he didn't get his way. He kept making the same point in slightly different terms, as if I was just too stupid to comprehend. As tomorrow is the station's closure day, I made sure to use up all of the gas this evening. Rob ignored my 3 requests for him to wait as I got my phone ready before leaving. He leaped out of the truck and ran into the store before I could even get it into park. The moment his door opened, I heard the TV turn on, but he didn't notice at all. I fumbled with my phone in a panic, missing whatever it was saying. I just got the crap, till next time, safe travels captured on tape. Although I appreciate all of Rob's insight, I've made the decision to go on my own. I regret not leaving him at the station this evening. I don't feel safe sleeping with him around, but I can't wait for them to reopen another day. I'll just drive away when he goes to the bathroom tomorrow morning, because I'm at a loss on what to do. He's either dozing off in the backseat right now or is quite skilled at pretending to snore. My gut tells me to stay awake, yet staring at this screen is making my eyes feel like someone poured salt into them. I have to find something else to keep myself going. I was right about that scumbag. Rob is dead. Ever notice how absurd things seem less absurd when you're not seeing them clearly? I could still picture Rob in the backseat, awake and patiently waiting for me to nod off before he would sit up, fasten his belt around my throat, and start tugging. I decided to get my gun out since I was so bothered by it. When it was finally time for breakfast, I tucked it inside my waistband and held it under my leg till daybreak. Rob slept through the whole night, so when I went into the forest to pee, I felt a little silly. This man is terrified of delving further into this horrible place. How scared must he be after what he's been through if I'm this scared? I'm the monster. I'm the one carrying a pistol and preparing to kill a man because he didn't agree with me. Until I came back and saw Rob at the wheel, I was completely persuaded to give up on my heinous idea. I could see him perfectly from the tree line since the passenger window was down, and he was looking wildly for the keys, which were safely tucked into my pocket. I made a lot of noise as I emerged through the remainder of the brush, since I had no idea what he may do if I were to meet him. He was opening a fruit can as I got to the truck, as if he hadn't been trying to get away from me all along. I didn't take anything important out of the truck, but I did make soup. I was prepared to leave him with some food and water, but as soon as he moved away, Rob lost patience, and he didn't go. Instead, we both waited for the other to relax. My mind went blank. It's one thing to picture it, but it's nothing like reality. He calmly said I would be staying behind, since I'm determined to kill myself anyway, and he exposed the crowbar he concealed nearby. I threw the keys to him and instructed him to take the truck, all while maintaining composure. It was instinctive, without any conscious thought. I drew my weapon and fired without warning as he turned to go. The first shot hit him in the middle of the back, and he fell with a terrible cry. I rushed in closer, then hesitated to take the last shot. I wanted him to know all that had happened to him. I gave him another blow to the head to put an end to his misery, when he started coughing up blood. At least he won't join the stranded any longer. I had anticipated feeling different, like if this location would transform me, but it had already done so. Rob's death doesn't bother me. I just did what I had to in order to survive. The irony is that he was correct. There are far worse things out here than death. Therefore, we should have kept on the lovely paved streets where it was safe. It took them 5 hours to locate the next dirt road after they left Rob's corpse behind. Despite the long and dreary day, I decided to waste some gas and turn around just in case. At midnight, my goal was to enter a station and have a beer. To be honest, I had no idea what type of problems I was getting into and didn't really care. When I turned onto the dirt road at 12:03, I saw a massive stranded behind the tree line with my high beams. I didn't slow down, and they didn't emerge. All they seek are easy pickings. Regretfully, I underestimated the rate at which the gaslight would illuminate. A thunderous roar rattled my windows less than 20 minutes later, and I was still running when the sharp cry of caught prey followed. I realized how stupid my idea had been, and reality hit in. A few moments later, I heard a low rumble of thunder, and I didn't realize it wasn't thunder until it was accompanied by the sharp cracks of breaking limbs. Anything that prowls these roads at night discovered me. I knew it would be game over if I forced myself to look in the mirror when I heard it break through the tree line. I had to drive more slowly in stage 2 because the roads are significantly smaller. I didn't even notice the low fuel sign because my entire concentration was on maneuvering the winding roads as fast as I could without losing control. However, when the gorgeous gas station popped up around the next bend, I nearly ran into the pump. Without even stopping the engine, I parked as close to the door as I could and threw myself from the truck. It took me a good 10 minutes inside and under the counter to realize that everything had stopped. I crawled very gently to a window and looked out. This monster appeared to be the result of numerous stranded being fused together. Thankfully, the entirety of it was hidden in a sea of darkness, leaving only its head visible under the station lights. After hearing the noises it made, I was surprised by how small it was, but what struck me most about its face was how hideous it was. Its lips was hidden beneath folds of pasty white skin that appeared to be pure scar tissue, and I will never forget the sight of its one glassy eye. Where the other had been, there was nothing but a huge black hole. It seems that the stations serve as safe areas since, although I knew it was watching me, it stayed far away. I summoned the bravery to test my notion after throwing up, and when I went outside to switch off the truck, the figure remained motionless. I felt secure enough to glance around the store at last after that. I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm fairly inebriated. I helped myself to a 6-pack of Coors and Cheetos and tore through the junk food like a death row inmate. Since I couldn't have outrun that beast all night, I wonder if it's feasible to fill up with just enough gas to run out before dusk. If so, that might be my last chance to reach stage 3. Hell, that's a very great thought. If that works, I could apply that tactic all the way home, giving me a whole week to look for anything before the store closes again. Oh my God, I am going to get a good night's sleep and hit the road at first light because I can now see the light at the end of this dark tunnel. I suppose I neglected to record my time on the back roads, but that's too bad. Next Saturday, it's the worst week of my life, and no one will ever see this anyhow. I just opened this to announce that I'm quitting because of the horrible things I've had to do to survive. My plan to only fill half the tank worked great, but it took 3 days to find a grass trail. Once I did, I never imagined I would survive long enough to find another store, but now that I have, I'm not leaving. The creatures in this stage don't care if it's day or night. They're hungry. If someone finds this one day, great. If not, I don't really care. I'm done. There are things out here that make the one-eyed monster look like a kitten. I'd sooner face the devil himself than go out that door again. It's almost midnight on this Saturday, so even though I know it won't work, I'm going to press upload anyway. My name was Jess Palmer, just in case. Ignore the side roads, the back roads, maintenance tunnels part 2. Given that my previous post was successful, I should probably inform everyone of what transpired. Think of it as a public service. If you ever find yourself lost on a back road, just pull over and use your GPS to locate your way home before it's too late. Nothing except PTSD is what you take away from that location. For heaven's sake, where should I begin? I guess with the station, anyway. When you begin to consider a rundown convenience store your home, you know you're a lost cause. To be fair, though, drinking every day helped a lot. I freely admit that when I wrote my last post, I was half belligerent, and I know what I'm about to tell you sounds crazy, but this is what actually happened. It wasn't something I mentioned previously. I don't think I mentioned many things, but that final store played an odd radio station over the speakers all the time, and I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. The music was eerie. There was never any singing, only instrumentals. The tunes were slow, almost calming in the mornings, and then more lively in the afternoons. At night, however, they would play gloomy, spine-tingling symphonies that sounded like Satan's own orchestra rather than just elevator music. The woman from the gas pumps came on to talk, and every time she did, I felt relieved. She would see her reports on a monitor that hung in the rear corner, but I was never able to get it to turn on or change the station. Although I suppose it makes sense that there would be a farewell call, Olivia O'Neill's eerie rendition of Breakfast at Tiffany's was nearly too much for my frail heart to handle until an emergency broadcast cut it short. After that, Olivia O'Neill returned with another special announcement. Normally, she doesn't appear after the evening news. Grass Grovers, greetings and thank you for selecting Last Stop Station. It's 10 minutes to closing time for the store. Please gather your last purchases and quietly make your way out of the store in a single file. Neither pushing nor yelling is necessary. It will take the cleaners until 12:01 a.m. to arrive. May Cyrus bless you. I was too preoccupied staring into her eyes to pay attention to anything she was saying. They appeared to have gone dark, but I could have been having hallucinations. The few prior times I saw her, her eyes weren't completely black. I'm not sure what color they were before. I kept telling myself not to pull the trigger the one time I attempted to eat a bullet, so I ended up hiding the gun beneath the counter. I was expecting it would finish fast, like a shot to the head, there 1 second, and gone the next. I didn't want to look at it any longer, but I also couldn't get rid of it. When everything abruptly went dark at 11:59, I believed I had succeeded in my race against time to drink myself unconscious, but it was only temporary. A red, silent siren dropped silently from the ceiling just as fast, and I felt so lightheaded from the strobing light that I puked all over my shoes. I looked at the clock just in time to see the final 5 seconds pass by, and at midnight, the siren disappeared into the ceiling. The lights returned, brighter than before, and as the automatic doors swung open, spots continued to dance across my vision. Several white, hazy blobs entered the station and dispersed in all directions, nearly making me throw up once more. It was a sobering sight to see them stream in. But I was too panicked to make any sense out of it. I attempted to inquire about their identity and desires, but it's impossible to know what I truly said, and they were never going to communicate anyhow. They moved forward, and I backed away. I crawled as far as I could, eventually coming to rest against the counter. At last my vision cleared enough to see that the intruders were not stranded but rather just humans dressed in some sort of hazmat suit. I don't know why, but I've given the person who approached me the moniker Al. None of the others had even looked my way. He was the only one who acknowledged my existence. While some were cleaning, others were replenishing shelves. And it was then that I recalled the incident involving the cleaners showing up at 12:01. Have you ever watched a movie where they use little beeping and clicking machines to check for radiation? These folks, though, had some that appeared to be from the 1950s. At first, I believed they were small radios, since they had a part that resembled a microphone without the mouthpiece, and grips protruding from the top with a few dials on either side. I couldn't resist giving a small yelp when Al eventually cornered me. It took me a few seconds to realize that, despite my pleas, he was just scanning me rather than actually hurting me. He put his equipment aside and grabbed for me after it failed to find what it was searching for. She put both of her hands on my hips in a casual, non-threatening manner. I genuinely yelled at that moment as I felt his fingers close, but it's not essential what I thought at the moment. Everyone in the station turned to stare, but they all seemed eerie rather than angry. By now, all the machines had been switched off, so there was total silence when Al put his hands back on my hips and effortlessly lifted my shirt over my head. I suppose it was a reflex, although I'm not sure why I raised my arms. Al dropped my shirt on the floor and attempted to undo the buttons on my pants. There was little doubt that folks meant to have their way, even though I was outnumbered more than 10-1. My only option was to toss my own pants on the ground in an attempt to save what little dignity I still had. If it had ended then, I believe I would have been okay. But when my jeans were added to the pile, I discovered previously undiscovered levels of fear, and Al kept going back for more. Extra. I was down to just boxers, shoes, and socks. My backpack and gun were being added to the heap as well. Desperate to keep my boxers, I threw my shoes and socks at their feet and started to walk out, barely making it 3 steps before I was arrested. My final remnant of humanity was taken away by a third man, while 2 men grabbed my arms. I was pushed outside after being inspected and cleared a second time. I hadn't felt as though I had moved, but all of a sudden the station was in a warehouse with artificial lighting to mimic the sun. The surrounding metal walls matched perfectly, appearing as though they had been constructed after the station was positioned there. It was similar to being on a film studio set. I could still see my car parked next to the pump, being emptied by a group of cleaners. Finding clothes was my first concern, even if it meant wearing one of those strange outfits, so I started thinking about how to get one of them on my own. At that moment, I became aware of what was beyond the parking lot. A broad, concrete route that could be followed either left or right. Standing on the path, I could see for miles in all directions with no end in sight. There were no doors, just neat gaps in the walls. Fortunately, my uncertainty was short-lived. I had no idea what to do. Looking left again, I saw that what I had previously believed to be a solid wall had opened up into a doorway. I was about to go since it startled me at first, but then a man appeared out of nowhere and motioned me over. Though his non-cleaner attire was consoling, it wasn't the reason I trusted him. Rather, it was the fact that he had on the same terrified expression I could only envision myself donning. I wasn't prepared to find out what caused the fear to appear on his face as his eyes scanned the passageways, as if something would materialize at any moment. He pulled me inside the door and shut it once I was near enough. We were surrounded by shelves full of paper towels and trash bags in what I can only describe as an Amazon warehouse. It seemed like the mother of all Sam's Clubs. I chose to stand silently and cover my junk with my hands in an embarrassing manner because I had nothing better to say. "Man, this is where it is. Use this for the time being. And before we part, I'll take you to get some clothes." He opened a carton of industrial-sized trash bags and threw one over. His name is Doug, by the way. As he took us through endless aisles of miscellaneous goods, I put it around my waist and introduced myself. He would occasionally stop to put things in his bag, but our stops were never longer than a few seconds. His long hair was pushed back into a man bun, and he was dressed in orange board shorts with white and blue floral prints. He was skinny and a few inches taller than me, but his deep voice gave the impression that he was older. His pack appeared to be the kind that campers use on their week-long journeys. It appeared that it was unable to hold one more item without rupturing at the seams. I had a ton of questions, but I didn't know how or where to start. I gave up and said, "Where are we?" "My friend, that's a fairly loaded question. You must have lingered in a station through the countdown to midnight if you are here, which indicates that the cleaners arrived and removed your clothing. For me, that was the worst part, but you don't seem to have fought back, wise man. Look at this," he said, lifting his shirt to see a horrible burn scar that was about the size of a quarter. Doug struck a cleaner in the head when he reached for his pants. This caused another cleaner to brandish what looked like a police baton, but was really more akin to a cattle prod. It seemed like someone brand named him with an iron, and it knocked him down cold in an instant. His body felt like it was on fire when he woke up and found himself lying in a concrete pathway, just past the station's parking lot. Realizing he couldn't stay there, he started crawling into the tunnel. "For what duration have you been here?" And further degree of terror was introduced to the scenario when he realized he had been stuck there long enough for the wound to heal. "I won't tell. It's too simple to get distracted here. For a while, you'll try to count the Sundays, but you can't. You cannot tell the time of day or night, because there are no windows, and most areas will render a new watch or phone unusable. Watches are completely unreliable, and phones appear to randomly shift their location." It was hard to take in the enormity of what he was saying. A sea of clothing racks loomed ahead, and it can be incredibly distracting to browse a store while nude. "Are we the only ones in this place? Do you see any more cleaners? How about the stranded people? Tell me those other things, please." Before I could say anything about the actual beasts, he interrupted, saying, "We're alone for now. We'll be gone for a while before the first groups return, as all of the cleaners are out getting the stations ready for another week of work. I only visit here once a week to replenish supplies, and occasionally I get tidbits of knowledge along the way. This time, I decided to try to attract your attention as I had heard that there was another quitter in the tunnels. I simply can't take those types of chances, so I wouldn't have approached you or yelled at you. Nevertheless, get dressed, stay put, and I'll be back in a minute." "Wait, no." I had no idea what he was doing and assumed he was going to leave, but I had to get dressed first before going after him. It was impossible to predict when or whether I would get another chance. I hurriedly put on clothes after grabbing the first item I saw in my size. Ultimately, I had a black flip-flop, a gray and red variant of Doug's shorts, and an electric blue station shirt. It still amazes me that not a single pair of jeans was present. Everything about it seemed like what you would typically see in the petrol stations off busy interstates that provide unique mementos to tourists. While I was considering my options, I noticed Doug walking back while carrying an additional bag on his shoulder. He tossed me the sack and said, "Here, pack some extra clothes. The hub, which is essentially the cleaner's residence, is only safe to access on Sundays. If you are discovered there, you will also be placed on the shelves." He winced at the thought, and I refrained from bringing it up. "I swear, you don't want that. However, how can we escape? My family must believe I've passed away because I haven't been home in too long. I apologize. You might want to bid your former life farewell. That makes it easier. Some even decide to go by a new name, but grieving is a personal experience. Just follow your gut instinct. But where is this location? It's not logical at all. Where? Me voice might be breaking, but I needed concrete answers." Doug sighed deeply and extended a long time after checking his watch for the 100th time. "You decide whether or not to believe what I've heard. We're running out of time, so move quickly or risk falling behind." That was okay because I felt like I was ready to believe anything after what I had gone through. "Are any of the game legends familiar to you? The ones where you risk everything to have a chance at winning anything from the devil. Typically, it involves a wish or some sort of luck, but there are many variations. Two well-known ones are the Infinity Game and the Midnight Game. Similar to Candyman or Bloody Mary. I didn't like the direction this was taking. Sort of you're on the correct road, but those are phony and only meant to frighten. The people I'm referring to are all too real. The first thing you must acknowledge is the existence of demons. They exist in various shapes and sizes, but there is a ruling class that is unassailable and akin to a deity. Souls are the fuel, money, and sustenance that keep their powers going, but gathering them can be a little challenging. A soul must be freely delivered to a demon. Even people who reject the existence of souls become defensive when asked directly to give up their souls. What do they do then? They put you in a position where you want to give it away. Are you with me? Well, in a way. You mean it's similar to the Devil's Crossroads or that golden violin thing? He gave that some thought. Closer, but that's not how they've done things in decades. People weren't buying into it anymore. Therefore, business was slow. You know what they say about things being too good to be true. Well, if you include a challenge or something that strikes a balance between effort and reward, people will take it seriously. So, someplace in this insane labyrinth, you're claiming that a demon will deliver me home in return for my soul if I was willing to accept the awkward situation because I really missed my family. Oh my God, no dude. This game is merely a relic from the past that nobody cared to close. It is not currently in use. This place was essentially reached by luck. The asshole in charge of it created a new game in which players must alternately turn left and right in order to play. There was no pattern or purpose to the journey. It's definitely more profitable than this place, but I'm not sure what happens after that. We're just stuck here for the time being, with everything basically operating on autopilot. It took me a few minutes to reply, but it wasn't because I didn't think he was telling the truth. Instead, no other explanation made sense. I was just taken aback. Does that imply that the only threat here is from the cleaners? When I said it, I knew it was too good to be true, but what else do you say in a situation like that? He didn't have to chuckle. He might have just said no. How I wish. This wouldn't be half horrible if. He abruptly stopped and turned around, dragging me with him. Footsteps were becoming more audible in the distance. Doug hurried to make room for us among the packs of bottled water that were arranged beneath the bottom shelf in the aisle we were in. Thank goodness I was mistaken, because I never thought we would genuinely fit, but I helped as soon as I realized what he was trying to say. The entire length of the aisles we were positioned between had a 4-foot gap behind the stack. We drew the water back in to cover our entry once we crawled beneath the shelf, and we waited in silence while the cleaners got closer. When we heard something wet and sticky being dragged over the floor, we recognized there was another sound mixed in with the footfall, but we couldn't exactly place it until it was only a few yards away. Nothing was audible between the tiny gaps in our hiding spot. Doug just shook his head at my inquisitive inquiry, but I could tell by the look on his face that he already knew what it was. We crawled out only after they had left a good distance from us, and the thick blood streaks verified the terror I refused to admit. If this is the endgame, why didn't they just kill me now? I wasn't expecting a response, but one did come through. Because they were designed to strip us of our humanity in order to convert us, not to kill humans taken from stations. The humans would be taken away by low-level demons when they were nude. No one is sure exactly what happened to them, but when they returned, they were cleaners. This was the game's previous incarnation. They don't talk. They simply follow instructions without fail. So why did they murder whoever it was? Nobody could have survived with that amount of blood loss. The supply hub is where all of the tunnels join. Therefore, it's likely that the individual in question was here obtaining supplies just like us. Here, cleaners are solely designed to replenish loose goods, and as humans are essentially livestock, they are transported to the meat processing facility. Every startling discovery made me a little less sensitive to the fear. Less than a day had passed since I had reached that exact point, yet my survival of the countdown gave me a glimmer of optimism. Then, for the briefest minute, I believed that the individuals in hazmat suits, who appeared to be officials, were there to assist. When my clothing were seized, I wanted to crush that tiny bit of optimism, but then Doug showed up, and the damn thing expanded. It took a minute for what he said to truly sink in and kill the hope right then. A part of me just wanted to figure out how to pass away quickly and easily. How large is this location? What other options exist? Don't you understand that it's endless? We aren't even in the same universe as one another. We're not on Earth. You can peek behind every door, but you'll never discover a way out. So we're essentially stuck in limbo. Never forget that no matter what kind of chamber you find yourself in, you're still in the tunnels. He expressed some emotion in his final statement, which made me realize that he was probably a very different man before that location. We walked down a garden supply aisle and noticed that a rusting door on the back wall had an exit sign above it. After giving the area one last glance, Doug handed me a pair of shears and took out a big hunting knife that was hidden under his shirt. We apologize for not having time for a real weapon, but this works just as well. Is it just that they don't have any guns here? Or do you just have a lot of skill with that? I tried to find a comfortable grip for my shears, and gestured toward his knife. Yes, there are lots of weapons and ammunition, but you don't want to use them. A few of the lower-level demons persisted in playing alpha. They call for backup if they hear a gunshot, and everyone runs. We've lost a lot of excellent individuals in this way, so we now strictly forbid firearms. Never forget that even when they are unable to fulfill great wishes, that won't stop them from claiming to. Hold on. You're in a group then. The number. Without the firearms, we could probably take out the cleaners. Could we seize control of the hub? Don't talk like that. You think suicide hasn't been tried. It's suicide. Do you really believe you're the only one who is itching to go home? The group that first discovered us consisted of 7 persons, but as of right now, there are only 5, and not one of them is the same. All 7 of the original members perished within the first year, along with quite a few more, and the most of them were not even caused by demons. There was no mistake that tone, even though he was whispering, and I could hardly hear what he was saying over the creaking door. When we finally emerged, the tunnel we had been in before was still unending in all directions. I apologize for your friend's loss. I was at a loss for words. Listen, the most crucial survival tip is to never let them to see you. They will not allow people to roam free in their insane realm. The pack won't stop hunting you down once they find out you exist, Jesse, and they won't need to sleep. That gave my fear a little life again. So, what more is there below? When we are unable to be in the hub, where are we meant to hide? I'm going to show you where the other rooms are. Take a look at our previous location. Can you make out the outline of the door? You might be surprised to learn how quickly your eyes adjust to seeing the straight lines. You should choose a location that is close to a hub entrance, but you should never stay anywhere for too long. If you smell rotten meat or observe a thick, black, slimy residue, you should immediately and silently leave the area, because that indicates the presence of a demon. His statements that time made it clear that I was not being welcome to join the group. Even though I'm not a very sensitive or small-minded man, the idea of being by myself in those tunnels was too much for me to handle. Oh, I see. I guess I wasn't selected for your private club, huh? He gave me a direct, angry look in return, and although I wanted to apologize, it was difficult to feel sorry for him given the situation. Then his words sliced right through me. With all due respect, you seem like a nice guy, but I no longer trust strangers. My wife is all I have left, and no other man will ever be close to her again. All right, whether you realize it or not, you're quite fortunate to be by yourself. It was impossible to dispute. I wouldn't have trusted him either. It didn't take a detective to connect those parts together. Do you have any more tips? Was the only thing left to say. Take the risk. There are countless tunnels. Although the number of demons in the world is unknown, you will most likely avoid encountering one if you stay on the move. If you hide out in one spot, something will ultimately find you. When we move, we search for the next hub entry 6 hours in advance and examine the doors nearest it for a spot to relax until the next station clean. And choose your trusted people very carefully. I shoved the thoughts of Rob down deep where they belonged. Every week, new people show up, and even good people can do horrible things when they're desperate, he said. When we first met, you mentioned that you had heard there was a new quitter. What did that mean? Wait, but how do I keep track of the days? By whom did you hear about it? We were whispering softly while strolling side by side with our heads close together, yet I had to hold back from yelling at the conclusion. It was becoming increasingly likely that I would have a full-blown panic attack since I was being forced to process too much too rapidly. We are quitters. We stayed in the station because we wanted to stop playing before reaching the last level. I'm not sure why it doesn't work in the hub, but I presume the cleaners don't need it. Every room plays the same radio channel you heard in the station. As for who told me about you, well, there are some people who want to end the cleaners' lives and don't care if they die in the process. They often take extreme risks, like robbing cleaner uniforms and infiltrating their ranks. If one of these people ever approaches you with both hands raised, That's your cue. It's almost like a game over screen. If you can, try to assist them. They're working hard. If it were me, I'm sure I would want to be put down. I was trying to memorize every word, but all I could think about was going through those dark tunnels alone myself. I was so focused on that, I almost missed the tiny door-shaped fissures adjacent to where Doug had stopped. I suppose now is the time for us to part ways. I sincerely appreciate everything. Without you, I already would have died. Before I leave, could you please show me how these things open? My voice wasn't as steady as I had planned. Just push. With the least amount of effort, the wall opened like a swinging door, and he offered me one final warning. Remember the sludge. If you must flee, make a quick break for it by running through the nearest door. Next, locate another entrance and another way out. Perform it 4 or 5 times at least. The only method to alter course in any of the straight tunnels is to cut through a room. Good luck. We shook hands, and as the door closed, I saw his wife briefly as he vanished into what appeared to be a hotel lobby from the 1990s. I realized Doug was right when I saw the sharp gash across her throat. I was fortunate to be by myself. I spent hours aimlessly meandering down the never-ending tunnel, praying that when I eventually came across a demon, I would possess the strength to not flee. Even though I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a monster's playground, I still feared passing away. I hoped the devil could take care of the situation, because I couldn't hang or shoot myself. People, never undervalue your instincts for survival. I kept going under the low, blinking lights, and when they finally went fully dark for the first time, I believed something was approaching. All of my grand rhetoric disappeared as I started to press myself against the wall in an attempt to find a door. The back roads, witches, and honey traps. Part 3. I'm relieved that the final update was released before everything broke. You are our only hope. So please. I never made it home. My family and I are no longer alone in this terrible place, and we have one more chance to go away. We are not safe. Please give the Louisiana Baton Rouge Police Department a call so they can arrange for a military response. We'll need SEALs, Green Berets, the Air Force, the National Guard, everything. Though they should have an open case already, without assistance they will never be able to determine what happened. They must understand that my family is also present. My children are very young. Milo turned 8 years old recently. Chloe is only 6, and my wife, Paula, says things that haunt me to this day. They eat away at my sanity throughout the day like parasites, until eventually nothing is left. She was hard to describe this area to, but then we had the kids to explain it to. The majority of the time, nothing happens. This place is so large that it's almost like running into someone in the middle of the ocean, but when you inevitably do, you move or die. Chloe still doesn't fully understand, and Milo treated it like a game until we had a close call, but I'll come back to that. He was the only one not having nightmares, but now we're each lucky to get 3 hours. Deep sigh. Initially, everything was just as it should be, but gradually the illusion broke apart. For crying out loud, we felt as though we were at home because we could still see Chloe and Milo's height marks on the wall, and our pillows still had the same scent. We were ecstatic and relieved, but as you may have read in my previous post, we were having problems with the police. They were supposed to send officers to take our statement, but instead they started teasing us and saying that they had gone, but no one was home. We assumed this was because they didn't trust my account, which is fine. We don't believe it at all, but we felt compelled to let someone know. People are dying, therefore we couldn't just sit on this information. People whose relatives are looking for them and who are thought to be dead. They're stuck here, just like us. However, when Paula told the policeman that he had to be at the wrong house, he became hostile, and I understood that I would have to travel into town in person to make my statement. I had every intention of doing so in the morning, but nothing could have kept me from going home that evening. We had a great time together, which might be our last pleasant memories, and I'm actually glad we decided to wait instead of finding out our fate sooner. We stayed up late, slept in, ate a big breakfast, and lazed around until lunchtime. I had a simple plan. I was going to the police station, make my statement, and go home thereafter, regardless of what anyone thought. I wanted to escape and realize that Paula's car was my only choice because I was so shocked by everything else that was happening that I forgot my car was still at that station. It seems ridiculous to say that now, but wondering what I would say on the insurance claim was a renewed source of stress. This is actually the first time I've given it another thought because I found out right away that our automobile wouldn't start. I'm not a mechanic, but I can handle some basic tasks because when you live paycheck to paycheck, you learn to get by on YouTube instructions. The car had become a complete lemon overnight, but the dead battery was the first issue I discovered. There was no oil in the engine, the belt was completely rotten, and the back tires were flat. Though unsure there was more to it, I didn't see the need to investigate. I then attempted to look for a tow company, but deep down I believe I knew what was going on before my phone entirely died. Then came the loss of water and electricity, and finally the disintegration of the makeup. The sky was growing darker by the day where we lived in a dilapidated cabin in the center of a barren forest clearing. Paula found it harder to comprehend. She hadn't experienced this place's torment like I had, and at first she didn't even think I was telling the truth. It's reasonable that she believed I was going through a mental breakdown as a result of severe trauma, but that didn't make the backroads any less real. I don't think she was completely persuaded until she saw Olivia O'Neill in person, and the Saturday night broadcast was shown on every TV in the home. Good news, Tunnel Raiders. Are you prepared to race to the hub again on Sunday morning? Don't forget to steer clear of peak hours and remember to stretch those muscles beforehand. Unless, of course, are you trying to figure out where to start in your new life when it comes to finding purpose? You may now be a cleaner, so there's no need to search any farther. Say hi to any tunnel staffer. There's no need to apply. Ages 3 and up are welcome. No questions asked. Be with you, Cyrus. When Paula heard it, her whole perspective shifted. She at last let go of the biblical rapture, and we talked about practical suggestions for what to do next. Hateful whisper/echo. You are the reason we are here. Still, it was a step forward, even though the plans weren't very good. We were aware that we couldn't stay, that we would need supplies, and that splitting apart wouldn't be safe. Should they be forced to flee, how would we ever locate each other again? If I didn't come back, how long would they try to hold out for? We couldn't bring ourselves to take the chance, but perhaps Doug had discovered something he could live with. We had to remain in unison. In the end, we spent nearly 2 weeks living in our make-believe home. We ought to have left sooner, but where were we going to go? However, Doug was correct about one thing. Well, about everything. But he was particularly correct about moving about a lot. We packed as much as we could carry the next day after that announcement. When you're figuring out how much weight a 6-year-old can take, you know things become serious. We didn't even make it to dusk, despite our plan to go early the following day. A blast of wind rattled the windows, causing Paula, who was upstairs with the kids, to peek up while I gathered anything that could be used as a weapon. I had never heard her scream like that in all the years we had been together. I don't even remember moving. I just remember being abruptly next to her. The children were screaming into her waist as she stared out the window, and I knew that whatever she saw indicated that our time was up. A nasty murmur or echo. I ought to have wed Aaron. It may surprise you to learn that there are several shades of black. For instance, Vanta Black is among the darkest. It absorbs 99.965% of light. At least that's what I learned on YouTube. Don't cite me because I'm not very smart. That's all that was on my mind when I saw this, except for this menacing black hole that was still receiving food from its tendrils. The sky was reduced to a field of gray clouds. It was expanding and experiencing hunger. Calling each fresh incident of dread indescribable may sound dramatic, but these things never get any easier to convey. It was as though someone had taken the darkness off the skies and concentrated it into one enormous black hole. We had to leave immediately. I turned Paula away from the window, and we exchanged a secret glance of understanding. Paula was shocked, but we didn't have time for that. We had to pick up our things and flee in the open on foot because there was no good way out. We both faked for the benefit of the other, even though neither of us thought we would get very far. We carried the kids as though really sprinting would help, but we might have just wanted to be able to keep them in our arms when it was all over. Is it incorrect that I wanted to speak first? Most likely, but I'm not really sensitive to things like that these days. We were almost knocked down by a gust of wind that resembled Hurricane Katrina as soon as we walked outdoors, but we managed to stay upright and continued traveling. All around us, debris flew, and each particle of dirt seemed like a tiny razor blade gliding over my skin. Hell, perhaps they were razors, since we had quite a few cuts once it was all done. The road that had extended for miles ahead when I had first returned had ended as we reached the end of our long driveway. It ended abruptly now, like if we were in a massive warehouse, and this was just one area. The tunnels had returned, extending in an infinite passage from left to right, much as they had when I had originally fled the gas station. Man, that seemed like a long time ago. For the sheer reason that it appeared closer, I steered Paula to the left, and before our house was permanently hidden, I ventured a last glance back. The entire home appeared to be only a few seconds away from collapsing as the shingles were being yanked from the roof and sucked into the vortex. A terrible echo or whisper, "I wish you had perished in the tunnels." It felt as though a massive door had been slammed shut, but there was no sound or breeze once beyond the tunnel wall. We were left in the poorly lighted backroad maintenance tunnels, just where I had left off, but we were unable to locate the hub that week since the entrance had vanished. I cautioned Paula and the children about the smells, including black slime, and showed them how to discover doorways by looking for straight lines. However, experience is the best teacher, and that was learned quickly enough. We roamed aimlessly for days, spending the night in any hotel that seemed comfortable enough. We were in what looked like a Hollywood film studio when the Sunday report arrived the following week. There were several stages set in various scenarios, all of which were made up. Although the food was plastic, the furniture was cardboard, and there was no functioning lighting. The fact that it wasn't chilly was sufficient. Up until then, we had been fortunate to avoid encountering anyone or anything in the tunnels after leaving our residence, but things changed at the hub. We had hardly been in a few minutes when, as we were leaving, a pair of arms suddenly emerged from an aisle. Chloe was so afraid of being loud that she only gave a little scream as the man grabbed her. Her small hand tore from mine, and as soon as my fingers closed on nothing, time stopped. When the man darted off with our daughter, Paula lunged for him, and when she fell to the ground, I leaped over her corpse. As I closed the distance on the stranger, inch by painful inch, the only sounds I heard were those of running feet. I threw myself forward, thinking he was within reach. For a split second, I felt a euphoric rush of relief, stronger than the first time I saw my family again. However, as soon as the coarse fabric slipped from my grasp, my insides broke down, and I fell to the ground empty-handed, shouting with contempt, "You've killed us all." I might have lay there in the middle of the cat food aisle till the cleaners arrived if a miracle hadn't happened, but I yelled at that moment because I knew I wouldn't catch him. Suddenly, Chloe's captor and two teenagers rushing in the other direction collided. With the four bodies reduced to a tangled mass of limbs clawing for freedom, my baby easily slipped through. The two teenagers were already in a panic before the crash, and the piece of shit who had taken my daughter was now a picture of crimson fury, slamming his fist into the young boy's face. He had smiled so disgustingly before. Blood spilled from the child's nose across them both, and his girlfriend, whatever she was unable to contain her screams for longer. The man spotted me pulling Chloe into my arms and instantly covered her lips with his palm, stopping her sobbing in the middle of her cry. He struck the youngster's head with his other hand, as if he was going to give up. The boy went limp at the sound of the wet crack, and I turned away before witnessing anything more. I was unable to assist that girl, nor could I assist my own family. Turning the first corner, we saw Paula and Milo again, but there was no time for a reunion. We pretended not to hear the girl cry twice more, and I'm embarrassed to confess that the only thing I felt relieved that it wasn't my daughter was that we were all getting away from that location and that poor kid's body. That's what you get out of this place. It takes everything positive and rots it from the inside out. To be honest, I don't even feel guilty about it. I just know that I should. On our way out, we gathered everything that looked helpful, but we didn't stay to shop. Perhaps Doug's approach is superior after all, but there isn't time to think about it more. After a little while, there was a flickering of the tunnel lights. Knowing in my heart that this wasn't just a random blackout, I walked to investigate the rooms close by, and sure enough, there was a strong scent of rotten meat. Paula gasped in shock when she saw the unusual space we had entered. It was the only other outside room I had seen since the crossroads, and this one was actually kind of beautiful. There was a sky instead of a ceiling, and a crescent moon glowed like a nightlight among millions of shining stars. Mushrooms of every shape and color outnumbered the trees 2-to-1. Some were as tall as houses, while others were scattered across the forest floor like clover patches. The weather was warm, but a light breeze kept it at the ideal temperature. It also had a slightly ominous vibe to it, not because of anything physical, but because of the mood. A forest shouldn't have had no sound at all, but our minds have default assumptions about particular environments, so mine was unable to process the absence of animals. There was a gentle breeze, no bird song, no cricket chirping, nothing moving in the brush. As amazed as we were by what we saw, we were unable to stop and continued exploring until we came onto a refreshing freshwater stream. To be clear, poisonous pools are not uncommon. Outdoor scenery certainly is. Sometimes they are blatantly poisonous. The green, slimy ones, for example, but other times they appear quite normal until you taste acidic copper and feel like you've been burned 1,000 times. Chloe passed out as we followed the stream to a lake where morning mist was still circling the surface. Paula opened her mouth as if to scream, but her eyes rolled to the back of her head, and she slumped forward across Chloe's short legs as I crouched next to her. Milo passed out to my left. My confusion lasted only a split second before the world started to whirl. We met Delphi that way. 1 minute I was staring at my unconscious family, and the next I was lying on my back with a woman standing over me. Bored. Oh my God. More people. When I woke up, the woman I had seen earlier was looking from the corner, and we were all four laying side by side on a rough wooden floor inside a small furnished cottage. The memory of fainting made me sit up immediately, but I was happy to see that my family was also starting to wake. There was no need for me to wait for an explanation because the woman was happy to have us gone. I apologize for knocking you out. The incense will temporarily remove any residual effects. My mushrooms act as guard dogs, allowing their spores to enter an intruder's pores as soon as they enter the forest. They're quite useful. Makes cleanup much easier. But since you guys are people, I'll just politely ask that you leave the area. Okay. Goodbye for now. Her face was young, too young for the knowing gaze behind her eyes. It felt like she was reading my mind, but I couldn't back down. She seemed irritated by our presence, as if we had chosen to be there. I knew she was asking for the impossibly difficult thing, even though I was too sleepy to really process it. It seemed like a freight train was speeding through my own skull, and Paula looked, well, she looked the same. You did this to us. Echoing a low, malicious tone. The skill of silent sobbing is one of the first things taught in the tunnels, so tears were streaming down Milo and Chloe's faces, yet this woman talked as if we were Bible salesmen. It was really annoying. I attempted to remain calm and not scare the kids anymore, but as I stumbled to my feet, my whole body trembled. Hey, who are you? Where do you think we're going? I'm a family man. Why are all of you down here? How come it's all so completely oak to cast other people to the wolves? All of us are confined here. Perhaps if everyone banded together and created a society, we would truly be able to escape. Have you ever thought about that? I was breathless, my legs trembling, and I knew my words were meaningless to her, so I must have sounded silly. I wanted to make her feel guilty, but there was no emotion left in her human shell. She never blinked or flinched. Half amused, half bored. Oh my gosh, it seems like you've never watched The Walking Dead. Look, if you have to address me, feel free to call me Delphi. But other than that, you're incorrect about everything. You are invading my home, so please go. Once more, I realize it wasn't deliberate, but the reality remains that it's time to move on. I'll guide you past the other traps, so don't worry. Her house. Is it true that she claimed this place to be her home? Whether you like mushrooms or not, moving about is too risky. There is no such thing as home down here, therefore we must all leave. I knew this chamber was too wonderful to be true. Are you fresh? We dashed into this area to avoid a demon. We really must go immediately, as it most likely followed us inside. I made an effort to calculate how long we had been unconscious, how long we had been within, and where the demon had disappeared. Surely it would have discovered us by now. Was the room big enough for it to have gone by us? And why didn't the woman respond to the threat? Oh man, you still don't get it, I said, chuckling. Disdainful. That demon is no longer alive. That was destroyed by the mushrooms. I cleared the area. I, the witch. You, person. I'm a local here. You are actually in my house. I just want to be alone. I don't host parties or hunt for roommates. Kinder. You guys seem like a good group, but this isn't the kind of environment where you really make friends, you know. Being by yourself is safer and easier. Return to the paved streets if your dread of the tunnels is the greatest. And just how are we meant to go about doing that? It's not feasible. Clearly, the same way you arrived here, of course. Are you serious? After the cleaners left, didn't you truly think to just head back into the station? Sorrowful. Come on, dude. Consider for fuck's sake. You have a family. Isn't that what you always say? For God's sake. It's like a chant going through your head. When they feel powerless, your gender is so pathetic, poor silly man. It sounded so apparent when she said it, especially the way she said it, that I felt like the dumbest man alive. Even if we can only make it back to the paved streets, it would still be safer if we could stay out of the way while the cleaners worked. If I can do that much, I'll figure out the rest when we get there. I was now eager to get out of there. But how much of the day was left? Would we have time? Could you direct us to the closest station? You won't see us again unless you help us inside. No thanks. You'll have to try next week because I'm already not going to see you again. In addition, you slept all day. Come on, time has a different pace here. This is one of the rooms that is more connected to reality than others. That's why the clocks function, and I can access the internet. The demons refer to them as honey traps, and they are frequently inspected despite being incredibly uncommon and nearly useless to humans. The final one is generally the one you find. Maybe I'm a soul slut, but I like the term desperate. Who wouldn't be? If I had a soul left to sell, I would have traded it right away. I'm sorry to admit it, but I had a sneaking suspicion that Paula might put in her own. Not that I didn't want her either. I simply wanted the kids to be freed. But when she said it, could you really picture holding your closest loved one's hand and hauling them to hell? Since I have taken that action, I sat there and watched things happen without saying anything. Things was as if I was experiencing a nightmare, but couldn't wake up since it was real this time. Which, tell me, do you also deal in souls? These appear to be the accepted method of payment around here, and even if my husband, disgust, already spent his on enjoying our company, I still have mine. Is there a deal we can come to? Piqued attention. Now I'm fond of her. I mean, you could survive in this world alone. He's pulling you down, sister. You're mentally prepared for this existence, but whatever. Let me think about that. Mutters to oneself. It has been centuries since I don't need souls in the traditional sense, but they do come in handy every now and then. Giddy. What do you know? Sure, maybe we can work something out. Come on, follow me downstairs. I haven't bottled a soul in a long time, so it's probably best that I check the ancient book of shadows first. Oh, and your partner may stay upstairs with the kids. Don't worry, we won't be gone for long." Paula gave me a strange look before escorting the witch downstairs, and it hurt more than any pain I've ever experienced. It was as if someone had cut open my chest and punctured my heart with 10,000 sharp needles, one by one. Every day it is a reminder that she will never love me again. And the pain never goes away because the nerve endings are too sensitive to become numb. It took us more than a year after our first meeting to leave the friend zone, and I felt that was the worst pain imaginable. Granted, it's not far from the worst, but seeing the person who was once described as their soulmate look at you the way she does now is what will kill you, to know what you had and then lose it nonetheless. She won't tell me what happened in that basement, so I don't know. I stood silently with the kids, staring at the door. They were curious as to what was going on, but I was just as unable to question as they were to talk. When Paula finally came out of the basement, she avoided looking directly at me. Rather, she soothed the kids, leading them to believe she was all right. However, I can tell when her smile is phony. Without a word, the witch passed by us, and Paula silently followed, the kids in tow. Marching in mute astonishment at what my life had become in such a short time, I was left to bring up the rear. I can't even recall my activities on the day I entered the back roads. It was simply another ordinary day. Nothing made it stand out from the others. It should have been lost to the passage of time, but instead it's me who's lost. Cyrus be with you. It was a pleasure doing business. In a matter of minutes, we found ourselves in front of a massive mushroom that had a red door embedded in its stem. My family and I left to return to the tunnels without even glancing back at what had appeared to be our only chance. Angry whisper/echo. You are the reason I lost everything. Though I'll never know what transpired in that basement, I do know what happened in the end. Paula took out a wadded piece of parchment from her shirt after we had finally got the kids to sleep in a dank cellar. It wasn't paper though. Rather, it was more like leather, too thick to break, but still flexible enough to fold. When she flattened it onto the floor, it looked blank, but then lines started to form, not words, but shapes. And soon there was a map. It seems that Paula had exactly the right amount of magic to make it function. If someone else attempts to use it, nothing occurs. There are no labels, not really. I suppose that was the exchange, that little touch of enchantment. The hub is a vivid green. The stations are intended to glow yellow, and the tunnels are just thin lines with vacant squares for housing. In a similar vein, honey traps are scarlet, but that also implies resources. That's why, unlike the previous two traps, this one has computers and an internet connection, which is why I seized the opportunity to visit one tonight, a week later. In any case, we are unable to spend another night here. The things we've gone through in the last few days alone. Well, let's just say I don't know what I would do if we hadn't had this opportunity to go away. There comes a time when you start to consider whether it wouldn't be more humane. Shrugging. Did you know that some kings used to poison their offspring before the enemy captured the palace during wars? Although it was a gentler death than what the troops would do, it makes no difference because we are departing in a short while. Echo or whisper from the devil, I could murder you myself. I had to spread the news before we did. I have no doubt in my mind that we will return to the paved roads. But there is one issue that I haven't mentioned to Paula. Since we don't have a car, and I don't think we will be able to find one, we will always be stuck at the station. This means that we will return to our starting point in precisely 1 week, and will have to start the process over. Kindly, I beg you, we simply cannot do this again. We're counting on you, someone, please, to discover a method to save us before next Sunday. The Backroad Soul Harvest. Part 4. Hi everyone once more. Most of you are undoubtedly wondering if we return to the paved streets or what's happening, so allow me to simply continue where we left off. Otherwise, I'll be hopping around, which will just make you more confused. I gained a lot of technical knowledge that some of you have probably been curious about. oneself. Initially, you might recall that I sent the previous update from a library. As I was leaving, I took note of an occult sign and picked up an armload of books. One article in specifically, Soul Harvest, had a great deal of significance to our circumstances, and I discovered. I read it to Paula after she went to sleep. I had so many times meant to tell her about it since, but I'm not sure if I'll have the bravery in the end. She already despises me greatly, yet she's been softening in front of the kids lately, and I don't want that progress to be lost. Bitter. To refresh your memory, both she and I have sacrificed our souls. Are you aware of what that implies? We didn't do anything. I sold mine a few weeks or maybe months before she did. Appeared distinct. I believed that I would ultimately burn in hell, but what hell was that? More detrimental than the tunnels. Dejected sigh. See, I'm not sure what I thought I knew prior to all of this, and I don't expect you to change all of your beliefs just because a random person says so. Stranger, maybe insane, but I've been through too much to dismiss it as synchronicity or superstition. Hell doesn't even exist, according to the book, at least not in the conventional sense. Similar venues do exist, however the structure isn't what you would think it would be. There are a variety of possible afterlife scenarios, but reincarnation is the most typical. We won't make an effort to clarify the remaining portions, but when you sell your soul, they don't accept that. They just remove a portion of your soul, else you would die on the spot. The spot, and any agreement reached would be nullified. In this manner, your soul will naturally search for the missing component when you do pass away. The buyer can do anything they want once they have your complete soul. They can fuel darker sorcery or transfer your spirit to another vessel, which they will afterwards command as a puppeteer. That vessel might be a lifeless person, a fetus, an animal, or even despite not knowing what a golem is, I am certain that I do not want to be one. Naturally, the buyer always retains a tiny portion of you for themselves. In this manner, the procedure is indefinitely repeatable. I'm still not sure how to stop the cycle, if there is one. The book didn't say whether. I have a terrible feeling the answer is no, but we would remember selling our souls. Basically, I'm probably screwed for the rest of my life if I don't discover a solution during this one. Eternally paranoid. I've been having really vivid dreams in which I'm someone who leads a totally normal life. And then haphazardly carrying out a terrorist attack. It makes me question everything. How many of these serial killers and mass murderers actually used free shall? Of those who claim to have seen the demons, how many actually did? Could it be my destiny? I know Paula would follow me down this rabbit hole indefinitely, but I don't see a way out. As long as there is nothing we can do about it, there is no need in telling her. Perhaps there shall be. Delphi didn't appear like a nasty witch, so there was some chance for her. If nothing else, I don't think. I suppose it would be better for her to use me as fuel rather than Paula to harm innocent people. Source: it's better not to exist at all. You never know what the devil has in store for you. I believe I spent the entire night reading that book from cover to cover. The only way to know the time is through broadcasts, and each room has a different time. So please with me. This location is just a collection of scattered remnants, similar to Hell's Junkyard, and historical relics. It was scary enough to think about slinking back into a station, but I had to do it with my family. I struggled to maintain my composure when I saw my kids engaging with cleaners. It was overwhelming to consider them donning those little white uniforms. We also chose to not run the hub. It wasn't really a choice to not enter the station, and Paula was. She was very clinical about it. Sure, I wouldn't make the effort. Cold/calculating. You will perish if you go to that hub. Therefore, I'll have to determine how long prior to departing without you. Wait. Should we manage to survive, the children would always ponder my intentions. Furthermore, we don't require the materials because failing is not an option. Her reasoning was difficult to refute, and if I'm being completely honest with myself, I believe she was mostly accurate. sour/bitter. However, it's more likely that I would have suffered only not so terribly as to stop them. Paula occasionally predicts events. I used to believe that magic was allowing her to get brief looks at the future, although that isn't the case at all. My time to understand there, but now I see. It's just common sense. Good, old-fashioned common sense. Logic. You start to notice patterns when you do anything for a long enough time. The past repeated. Accept it. It will improve your life tremendously. Well, back to the point. The youngsters were taught to make backup plans that day. Even though they are still very young, they have both grown up a lot since moving here. Should Paula and I were prepared for the potential that something would happen to us. It would be stupid not to. We can. Our first shot was the statement made at midnight on Sunday. Whatever type of room it is, Olivia O'Neill will appear to ask if you're prepared for another sprint to the hub once you're in. Even in the event that a screen must drop from the ceiling, her appearance as a human used to give the children a modicum of normalcy, but now that they've saw her mean face, Chloe sobbed for. Those dark, unfathomable eyes have been haunting her dreams for the past 2 days. Milo, though, wasn't not even somewhat fazed. Perhaps we ought to have let Chloe to play more Resident Evil, and less Mario Karts. We always believed Olivia was sending general messages to particular groups within the backroads. It resembled a local news report of sorts, with the majority of them sounding like they were pre-recorded. Later, after a duration of time that I am not even sure of, this one was dramatically different. When evil Olivia appeared, I knew something wasn't right, but her message made us shiver. Happy infomercial, good news for tunnel raiders. Has life in a maze brought you down? Act. Do you miss the paved streets' relative safety? Did a mean witch tell you that there was a route out? Have you forgotten the circumstances behind the station's departure? Did you allow? You personally felt there was a chance. Congratulations, then. As of right now, charming/ominous, Cyrus is keeping an eye on you. We all gawked at the blank screen once the broadcast finished. The fact that announcement was obviously made with us in mind, there was no getting around it. A portion of myself noticed Chloe's cries, but I was too far away to respond, and Paula was too. Cyrus be with you, was how every single transmission concluded, and I've always wondered who he was, but in a way that I hope I never discover. I didn't really have time to worry about that, of course. I'm always acting foolish. I mistakenly believed that being stuck at a station without a ride was my main issue. However, that wasn't even a problem. The station won't leave the hangar unless someone removes the real obstacle. Runs out of patrol. There's also the issue of who we might encounter after that. Could see Paula's mind going through the same motions, and throughout, Milo attempted to reassure his grieving sister. The poor child, like any of us, probably won't ever trust again. Intend. At first, it depressed us, but the more we considered it, the better our odds were that, prior to receiving the map, we had never seen stations because the doors seal. Once the cleaners have left, not even a seam exists. We had been passing them by the entire time. Theoretically, if we could enter before the doors close, we would be secure till the station departed or the following Sunday arrived. We would notice them before they did. As for who would be waiting on the other side, they would most likely use the pump first, and the vehicle would have to park. It provided enough time for us to observe them before presenting ourselves. We sensed the possibility. Benefits exceeded hazards. The true challenge was evading the cleaners. We set up camp in a band hall from a middle school in the 1960s. It was the first door past the cleaners' route to the station, and our goal was to enter covertly just before the final one departed. The noise. It was unsettling to hear the sound of their boots hitting the stone floor, even though I knew. Even though Cyrus was observing, it felt like they were heading toward us. But naturally, they didn't. They filed into the hangar one after the other. And the true wait began when the obtrusive sound of their footsteps faded into the distance. Started We were unable to predict whether they would be there for an hour or for the entire day. Missed the opportunity. Paula and I alternated between standing and listening at the broken door. It was hard to gauge how long we had been there, but we had to endure a last. Evil Olivia in one last round before heading out. Bubbly/taunting. Good news for tunnel raiders. Has your Sunday hub run been completed? You still have plenty of time to give up on any unrealistic plans to flee. But you, Palmer family, act quickly. Time is of the essence. Don't forget. Sirius, Cyrus is keeping an eye on you. It's important to give credit where credit is due. Paula and I exchanged a knowing glance, a tacit agreement that suggested her statements wouldn't have any impact on us. But then she said our names. It was clear that we were going to receive customized attention. Announcements. I don't know. It's just that being called out by name is different. Although our commitment was severely tested, it didn't alter our decision. In addition, Olivia attempted to manipulate us. After just 10 minutes, we were able to hear the cleaners depart from the station. It was far too late to make a hub run. We had to proceed immediately because we had no idea how long the hangar doors would remain open. Their heels, I glanced outside and saw 12 cleaners leaving the station. Like obedient little soldiers, they were all looking straight forward. Milo made a direct stand. Paula carried Chloe in back of me. They were going to be there if something went wrong. Run for it while I had the opportunity to buy as much time as possible. Guns are usually a death sentence in the tunnels, not a lifesaver. A sound that any demons nearby will follow a shot fired directly to your location. However, if your only purpose is to afford others some time to get away, then that's good to have. In case of an emergency, we entered the hangar doors immediately as they were closed. I would have been devastated a moment later. The sense of security that came from seeing those thick, metal doors quickly overcame any dread. Seal closed. We had arrived. We were cut off from the remaining tunnels. We had a station full of materials, and there were no demons or cleaners about. I was almost terrified to look again to see what kind it was. The paved street station would have been appreciated by me. Yeah, I've never been more in need of a drink as I was with that one. Life, but the cost wasn't justified. My family was not going to be anywhere near those dirt roadways, or worse. Can you believe that, despite what I've said so far, a part of me actually thought we were free to go? I assumed we would turn and see a little, dilapidated station, and be thankful for its soup and water. We would be appreciative of a place to stay. Then, eventually, we would return to the paved streets, which was my designated killing ground. Whoever entered, please refrain from passing judgment. You are aware of the effects desperation has on the brain. Most desperate period of your life. I wager your kids, even if you've been in combat, weren't by your side. Your spouse wasn't forced to go against their will. I'll wager, and you most likely weren't made to trade your own soul for anything, were you? If so, I would adore talk. But it's not a competition. Trauma is trauma, and everyone's response to it is unique. One thing about me that you guys should know is that I'm never incorrect. We had figured it out. Entering a grass trail station, and I lived in constant fear that we may at any moment discover yourself back in that terrible setting, or that the notorious Cyrus would appear out of nowhere seem. But in contrast to our usual week, we had a fantastic one. And of course, we still had to put up with Olivia's unique announcements. The previous time I stayed, they came on 3 times a day, every day. In a station, but because of the temporal shifts, it was always so arbitrary in the tunnels. The first time we heard one, Olivia strongly suggested that the hangar, and we were afraid. Doors wouldn't keep Cyrus out, but nobody ever showed up. Eventually, we discovered to completely disregard the threats. All that can be said is that the boogeyman is on his way. Doug claimed that the monster in charge of this had told you so many times before you stopped believing it. Location switched to a different game, and I started to believe Olivia was just bored, and yes, that was the reason she missed her master. Sorry, but it took us 5 attempts to finally arrive in the backroads, each and every. On Saturday night, we undressed, piled our belongings, and gave ourselves permission. Must swiftly vanish into the tunnels after being checked by the cleaners. Paula wasn't sure how they managed to hide the map, but once we did, we reverted to until we could try again, our old routine. After 2 and 3 tries, we reached a dirt road stations, and our final attempt to reach a paved street was the 4th one. Station. Soup and water have never tasted better. Throughout the entire period, we were never brought up to the back roads. We were inconsolable. So inconsolable that we nearly took a lethal risk. We want to remain for an additional week. The cleaners entered as normal, but the one who came up to me had 2 hands. Out, hands raised. It was one of those phonies Doug had warned me about. While looking, me with his Geiger counter device, a tiny bit of crumpled paper dropped from his grasp, and I hurriedly put my foot there, only bending to get it back as he turned away. As long as we cooperated, I knew we would be okay, but it never gets any simpler. Nor does it. However, when we first faced the tunnels, we had thought that wouldn't be required. We didn't want to lose the paved streets exit that we had discovered, but that note altered every aspect. As soon as we got off the hangar, I read it. It wrote, "Danger" in all caps. Then, there were instructions to a room farther down the tunnel and a warning, "Demon is coming." At the bottom, guidelines for locating and opening doors, along with the statement, "Friends are waiting." I could still recall Doug basically endorsing the phony cleaners, but I had trouble believing him. I've grown enormously since the day I arrived at the tunnels. Still, I thought that if he were sincerely attempting to assist, it was only because there was no way for him to know otherwise. Fresh to the match, he would have thought we had just come from the roads, and most likely. I'm still stunned. "A demon is coming" was a clever method to guarantee a prompt response with limited inquiry, particularly from those who have watched The Stranded. We already had a great plan, so I didn't understand why we needed to meet with him. Set up. Like everyone else, we were going to duck around the corner and slink back in. Paula claimed to have had one of her feelings on Sunday, but that returning right away would be too easy, and that the tunnels did not accomplish easy. She was correct once more. I ought to have noticed it. Arriving, too. In any case, we escaped a bullet. Though we were keeping the escape plan to ourselves, we agreed to listen to the man. No matter how kind he might be, we weren't acquainted with him. We couldn't take the chance of tying a stranger about ourselves. We counted 6 doors on the left as we continued down the tunnel, and walked into the 6th. A tiny, plump, gray-haired woman was shocked by our appearance, but she welcomed us inside without a second thought, her sympathy obvious face as she took in the children. We were given new clothes, and before we joined the group, we were free to get dressed. Deeper still, around a dilapidated dance club were 5 other people, 4 males and 1 woman. Each of them staring sorrowfully. A short, shaggy man appeared to stand just past the elderly woman. Given their resemblance, they might have been siblings, but the manner they stared at each other and replied, "It's more." Later on, we found out that their names were Mike and Marion. But before we could have a conversation, we had to move to their backup gathering. Location. Judging by the appearance and scent, the living room of an abandoned crack den. As we waited for the remainder of their group, Mike gave us an explanation of the tunnel's regulations. Gang to show up. Nothing new was what I was expecting to hear. I was just annoyed about. We were wasting our time, but those Geiger counter wands aren't as simple as they seem. Those look for organic materials, and once discovered, inorganic materials, clothing, for example, are divided. Real-time results are transmitted by the equipment to the main office. Implies that any demons that were still out there would have known about our Paula was always present and never missed a beat, so nobody ever guessed that this wasn't our first visit. Afraid/perplexed demons. You refer to the malnourished, unwell individuals we observed in the forest. The first night we were lost, they assaulted us, but they left as soon as we engaged in combat. Returning. How come they want us? Calm/empathetic. Don't worry about the stranded. You won't see them. Any in this area. I'm talking about real demons, the kind you see in horror films. We don't have time to tell you the entire tale, but chances are there's one searching for you as we converse. It's okay. You won't be discovered right now, and you'll pick up the skills quickly. We get down to business. We've developed an infallible system and haven't lost any lives in a year and more. Afraid/perplexed. But what are they after? What occurs if we are discovered? How do you mean system? Calm/sympathetic. It's preferable to avoid being too technical in front of the kids, I am aware. Although there are a lot of things to consider, there are guidelines for living here, a system, and if you can survive if you abide by the rules. Numbers have power, therefore we take turns making. There are other children in our home, so everyone pitches in with the housework while hubby runs. Group as well. When we return to base, you'll get to know them. Our guys will undoubtedly be present. If not, we'll have to go without them. Any minute now. Wary/apprehensive. That seems like a nice way to live. And we appreciate the orientation, but all we want to do is head home. Perhaps if. Several men's muffled screams and their rushing footsteps may be heard in the tunnels. As they approach, the noise level increases, and then all sounds are suddenly muted with the damp sound of bones cracking and flesh being torn apart in a violent impact. The terrifying noises coming from the tunnels made everyone freeze, but the moment everything fell apart. Any sound, everything happened extremely quickly. Mike's group started to pull up in the rear. He gathered Chloe in his arms and hurried to lead as the others close in all around him, obstructing our daughter's view of us. They responded to our objections by demanding that we follow along. They left the remainder of their party for dead. It didn't give me much hope for their ideal system. After following them through 6 rooms and tunnels, Paula turned to give me a glance that said, yes. She shared my thoughts, believing that if after they returned us to their base, we had no idea how long it would take to get out. My humanity has faded more than I realized, if we even lived long enough to attempt. Didn't think twice. After the initial shock of learning those men had died, I was free to experience the full wrath of these individuals' attempts to. Very agitated, they were aware that we didn't want to accompany them, but they couldn't accept it. So they abducted our child. Well, everything that transpired after that was not my fault, but theirs. You do realize that I was at a loss for what to do. Sorry, I recognize you. Comprehend. Since you've always been there for me, you're actually the only people I can aim for now. You simply spend too much time thinking about everything, and it's likely to irritate you. Isn't that right? Disbelieving/disassociating. The younger female was following the tail of the group and, before I knew it, I was dragging the poor girl backwards with a mouthful of her hair. She screamed that reverberated down the hallway, muffled Paula's startled cry as I took my place. In the event that they did not release Chloe, I would twist the woman's neck to break it. I've heard the urgency in Mike's voice in my own, so I wonder how young she is in real life. Was desperately trying to speak in a calm voice. Hold on. You're unaware of what's going on. We promise we're just attempting to assist. You are incapable of comprehending the peril we are facing, as we haven't gone far enough. That shouting indicates that it understands just where we are right now. Laughs softly. Oh, what's that? Do you smell it? It will arrive soon. As you wish to murder your loved ones. Okay. Chloe hurries to her mother after Mike drops her off, and at the same moment, a door between the two sides suddenly split up. Disassociating/disbelieving. The relief I experienced at seeing Chloe make her way back into Paula's arms were chopped off before I could free my captive. A door that stands between. As Mike's group and I parted ways, my worst nightmare, entering the murky tunnel, was revealed. brightness. It felt like someone else was in charge of my activities because they were entirely automated. Body, and I was only seeing everything from the perspective of a third party. A lot of things occurred. Suddenly, I became somewhat aware of the screams coming from behind the demon. You would think that all the hubbub would have directed its attention on them, but instead seems to be staring at us alone. It was more adept at mimicking people than the insane, savage ones you typically see in the tunnels, similar to the person who purchased my soul, but I'm not sure, and I don't want to. I would say that I sensed his aura. More like this devil was so wicked that it oozed from his body as heat waves, which were visible to the naked eye. Parts of his face were hidden by the low illumination, but what I could make out seemed to lack a skin. He appeared entirely burnt and red, as though his skin had been scorched. Out of sight, his eyes were like blazing red-hot embers with no hair, and his peeled back. Sharp, needle-point fangs protruded from his lips. From the shoulders down, he was coated with a ragged brown robe. Looking into those eyes gave me the impression that I might burst into flames. I was drenched in sweat as instinct took complete, unreserved, ruthless control of my body, and I immediately pushed the poor girl into the beast before turning to pursue it. My family is already running away through the nearest door. The chorus of cries that reached previously unthinkable heights behind us. I dared not turn around, but the sound that still bothers me sounds a lot like the crushing of a skull. That thing's hands are visible on either side of the girl's head in my dreams. I don't even recognize her name, just the sound of her cries being suddenly muffled when those enormous squeezing hands start to feel like that horrible crunch. Next, the noises of her family's cries of panic, agony, and gunfire. Paula led us out of sight without consulting the chart, so we had no opportunity to enter a station that day. Our goal was to cover as much ground as we could, so we didn't halt till a few hours later. It was a different Planet Fitness. Have I explained how numerous ones do we find? It's crazy. In any case, we had perhaps the worst week in the tunnels ever during that one. We didn't have any. The only things we have on our backs are our hub supplies, which are any resources we find. To keep us going, I risked multiple honey traps. They typically had some sort of water and snacks, but by the end of the week, it was all worthwhile because we managed to enter the fifth and last Styrian hangar, a paradise-paved street. After 4 nights in the hangar, the blinding brightness of the sun broke through. Via use of the windows, we were all on top of things, silently crying with delight, but it was too early to rejoice. With the children in tow, Paula led them behind the counter as I skulked toward the entrance. All I had to do was glance outside to see our entire strategy had no value. An ancient blue van with handicap identification was parked at the pump. Its back doors were quite spacious. Door as an old man in a wheelchair was helped by a middle-aged woman wearing purple scrubs. Through the speakers, I could hear Olivia's voice, but neither of the newcomers appeared to be listening. As the man was being lowered by the van's lift to the ground, I summoned Paula over, and she observed the issue right away. We couldn't just murder them and steal their van, could we? Was it really that different from what it would have been like with a different family or Rob? Okay, I really don't know what's right or wrong anymore, so I'm asking. Given that I don't possess a soul, in any case, I don't think it matters. What good am I if I'm merely a demon? Possession. Paula at least knows to whom she belongs. Weary. I have to quit worrying about that. We ultimately made the decision to get along with the immigrants. Just 83 years old, Mr. Sanders. Clear and only had 6 months to live, while Jenny, his nurse, was a single mother with 3 children. She needed some convincing as to what this facility actually was. She was in transferring Mr. Sanders to a hospice when he became a little turned around, in her own words. She hadn't been traveling long enough to have any suspicions. Was incorrect, and she undoubtedly believed that we were insane. But when she was unable to contact she opened up slightly to our story, whether it was about the cops, her office, or her children. Not by much, To hold her in one place, we ultimately still had to kidnap the elderly man. It brought to recollect Mike's departure with Chloe. The children assisted in placing Jenny at ease, but, surprisingly, Olivia's declaration was what persuaded her in the end. She was no longer in Kansas. The previous speakers had no wires connected to them. Olivia shouldn't have known our identities, and they shouldn't have worked. Amazed/jovial. Hi there, station squatters. We'd like to offer a unique, special thanks to the Palmer family, who were the first to ever leave the maintenance and return. Tunnels naturally. No one has ever been prepared to give up as much as they have. As well. Imagine for a moment that Mike and his tiny partisans have been robbing our cleaner recruits for almost 10 years, but not any longer. You cast the daughter of the leader into our master's arms, and now there's a civil war among the others. Cyrus is eager to meet you once more. In stunned stillness, we all fixed our gazes on the presenters, taking in their remarks. Never will we be uncertain about the sincerity of Mike and Marion's intentions, or whether Olivia's message was just more mental tricks, but something in the depths of my gut tells me she didn't have to pretend like that. One is the speed at which he dumped Chloe, acting as though it had been entirely in vain. Gain other than our own. When it threatened his own people, he didn't give a damn about what we done. That's the drawback of living in the tunnels. You're not allowed to ask questions. First inquiries, such must come later. I hope we haven't made an even larger mistake, because we are afraid of doing the same one again. By letting the elderly man and his caregiver to survive, but in the worst-case scenario, they won't be too difficult to manage, particularly if we tend to the woman first. That is the way we must think these days. I suppose this is sufficient for one update. Jenny was kind to us now that she believes us. Sufficient to lend me her phone. I have to assume that you will see this message as the others have. I wish I was concluding with something a little more optimistic regarding. The most crucial thing is that we're leaving those goddamn tunnels and heading home. We're not going back there again, no matter what. I would rather perish than endure. One more run on Hub. Additionally, there's always the possibility of outside assistance. Correct. Hey, I really don't want any of you to consider trying to come here, but just in case to be connected to the military or the police. Now they could be able to set something up. Yeah, understand. Perhaps they could send down some drones and tanks, some missile monsters in the grass trails with launchers. You never know what might happen if you can endure for a sufficient amount of time. And once established, surviving on the paved streets is easy. You've endured the maintenance tunnels. I'll try not to keep you guys waiting so long for the next one. Until then, wish us luck.